Hello, Jimmy here, and today we're going to talk about something that's kind of cropped up recently in my comments. I say it's cropped up recently, it's been there since forever, like people saying that they are 2% Welsh, 4% Irish, 13% Venusian. Niche Doctor Who reference, let's roll. So we're going to start this off by saying this is an incredibly complicated and nuanced subject. And before we jump into the subject matter at hand, I want to just say thank you to today's sponsor, because this video is sponsored by June's Journey. Yes, June's Journey, the actual game that's really good fun. June's Journey, if you haven't heard of it, it's a great game that is effectively you play June Parker, and you are helping June to solve the murder of her brother-in-law and her sister in glamorous 1920s New York and other places, because it is a fascinating game that is both a hidden object game, where you get these beautifully rendered images and settings full of a very diverse and impressive cast of characters, and you have to find the clues that will help June on her journey. Exactly, hence the name of the game. I've been really enjoying it. I've been enjoying relaxing whilst playing a bit of June's Journey after editing and after recording my new podcast, and I particularly enjoy one of the other elements of the game, which is a home decorating and improvement aspect, where you have an island with a mansion on it, and you get to basically design your garden around the mansion. And I really like gardens and designing and putting plants and things in different places, so I find that really enjoyable and really cool. And you can play it on your own. There are clubs that you can join to play as well. And if you want to download the game, there is a link. There's a pinned comment and there's a QR code that you can use, so you can go off and download the game for free. It is a free to download game, and it works on Apple, it works on Android, you can get it on your mobile, you can get it on a PC as well, you don't have to play it on a phone. And if you like the idea of murder mystery, a really engaging story, and beautifully rendered backgrounds and settings, and a fun home improvement and sort of garden estate, if you like looking at maps of gardens when you go to big country houses like I do, you're going to really enjoy that aspect of it, because you can kind of be like, oh yeah, we'll put the fountain in the middle of the hedge maze. Whoa. I just love it, it's really good. But yeah, if you want that, and if that sounds like fun for you, follow the link in the description or in the pinned comment, use the QR code, and go and download June's Journey. Go and enjoy it. So I have a background in archaeology and archaeological studies, but my focus has always been material culture related. I study gravestones, I study buildings, I study that sort of thing. I study shards of pottery that people dig out of the earth. But every now and then, DNA starts to be a part of what I'm looking at, and I have looked at DNA in school. 10 years ago I did A-level biology, and that involved learning about Gregor Mendel and his peas, and the very start of us identifying DNA and the building blocks of life, if you like. After that I did a little bit of how DNA analysis works archaeologically at university, but throughout all of that, the thing that struck me was DNA analysis is ridiculously complicated and nuanced. DNA analysis is not simple biology, because there is no such thing as simple biology. Biology is an incredibly complex, utterly mind-blowing series of structures that create the spider plants behind the camera and me and like chocolate. It's just ridiculous. Biology is intense. But in recent years, human genomics have made massive leaps. We have structured the human genome. We have the human genome. It's been mapped. We have a map of what makes us, right? DNA and RNA sequencing has rocketed in the late 20th century and early 21st century to the point where we can now offer what you might call consumer genomics, where you can send a sample of your spit to a company based in a mysterious laboratory somewhere, and they will take that sample of your spit and they will tell you what your genetic makeup looks like, what your DNA looks like, basically. Or will they? Because a lot of these companies, and I'm using the term Ancestry DNA here, not specifically referring to Ancestry.com, rather I am using it to refer to DNA that claims to allow you to trace your ancestry. Cool. There are many companies that do this, and they basically do the same thing. They take a sample of your DNA, usually a spit sample in a tube. It goes to a lab somewhere where a scientist of some kind does tests on it. And they use an array of machines, one of which is actually called an array, and they basically will tell you if you have genes that are likely to cause genetic diseases. Alzheimer's disease is one of the things that people often get tested to see if they have the Alzheimer's genes. And there are problems with this. People also do it to figure out where their ancestors are from, and this is very, very popular in places like North America, with people who are effectively descended from migrants, however those migrants got to North America, because many North Americans don't feel that they have a right to call themselves of the land that they live in, and want to figure out where the heck their DNA comes from. The problem with Ancestry DNA testing is it doesn't work. Hey gang, Editing Jimmy here. You can tell because I'm casually dressed and filming this on a phone. So, I don't mention here a bit of a nuance I've forgotten. I make a blanket statement, which is a naughty thing for a Jimmy to do. The Ancestry DNA tests do not work as a way to see if you are genetically related to somebody in your deep past. They cannot tell you that you are genetically related to somebody 1,000 years ago unless a specific test is done using ancient DNA, which is what we call DNA samples taken from archaeological specimens. It does work if, for example, you are trying to find your long-lost brother or sister or mum or dad. That can be very, very good, as I say later in the video. One of the other reasons it's often used in places like the Caribbean, North America, Africa, you're guessing where this is going from, is to figure out where enslaved people came from. So there are programs happening right now, and I'm linking to it in the description, that use archaeological DNA and DNA samples from the skeletons of enslaved people to figure out where they came from and to try and reconcile them in a way with their origins, maybe to repatriate their bones, and just to get a fuller picture of these people whose lives were cut short, who lived through great pain, and who basically died unknown. So amazing stuff is being done with DNA sequencing and DNA analysis. It cannot tell you if you are a direct descendant from Harold Godwinson. We don't have Harold Godwinson's DNA. It doesn't work like that. And there are various other reasons why people might try to do this DNA testing. Again, the slavery thing, this is what I was talking about. This is what I was saying. There you go. It's such a complex issue that I've actually taken notes for this video. I rarely have notes in front of me when I do a video, but this one I've had to, because DNA is big, right? There are 3 billion, that's 3,000 a million, 3 American billion base pairs of DNA. And you've got the 4 letters of DNA, right? A, T, G, and C. And you've got 3 billion base pairs made into 23 pairs of chromosomes, various typologies. If there are any doctors of genetics watching this, by the way, and you want to jump in and give us a better description of DNA, or just link to the Wikipedia page on DNA in the comments, please do so. I am not an expert, as in every video I do. But, as far as I'm led to believe, 97% of our DNA is kind of support structures and bits and bobs that help the actual DNA to stay where it's supposed to inside your body and your cells and all of that kind of thing. And there are bits that we don't need anymore from evolution. As our species has evolved, the DNA has changed and the makeup has changed, and some of that's left over, and it's just kind of there, sat there. You've still got your school books with your notes on how to make your first letters, even though you've also got advanced theory on creative writing on your bookshelf, that kind of thing, right? And it's nice to know that some of us are hoarders to the genetic level, and we share 99.9% of our DNA. As humans, every single one of us on the planet shares 99.9% of our DNA. I share 99.9% of my DNA with you. Yes, you, the individual who's just gone. Who, me? Yes, you, and also you. But not you, you are a cat. Please lift the cat off the keyboard so that you can see the video. Thank you, that's better. You, not the cat. I am not 99.9% cat, I'm like 65% cat. Out of this 99.9%, what we look at really is kind of 0.1% of that DNA when we're doing the Ancestry DNA analysis, right? We're looking for the gap. We're not looking for what we share, we're looking for what's different. And out of the, checks notes, 3 billion base pairs of DNA, Ancestry DNA testing normally looks at about 700,000 locations within your DNA. So within that 3,000 million, 700,000. And most of these places claim to have a margin of error of between 0.1 and 1%. So they say that they have an accuracy rating of between 99 and 99.9%, right? But even if it is 99.9% accurate, that's still hundreds, if not thousands, of errors that can creep in. And they do creep in because we have we've got dozens of articles and posts all over the internet of people who have sent a sample off to 2 different DNA companies, and they've come back and they've received 2 different sets of results. We have genetically identical people, right? We have identical twins who send samples off and get wildly different results, with one saying that they're like half Irish, a quarter Cherokee, and a quarter Spanish, and the other says that they're like half Southeast Asian and a quarter Sub-Saharan African, more on that in a minute, and a quarter French. These margins of error do happen and they do exist. They don't check the full sequence. They don't do a full DNA sequence on you. They check these 700,000 locations, as I understand it. And they kind of look into genes, and genes are a possibility, right? A gene is a possibility of something. So you might have the genes that cause blue eyes, but then within that there are variations of that. You might have the gene that causes red hair, but there are variations of red hair genes. You might inherit you might have 2 blue eyes causing genes and not have blue eyes, because genetics is just mind-blowingly nuanced and complex. Punnett squares, yeah, all of that nonsense. It's crazy how many factors and how many variables there are that could go wrong. And we haven't even touched on where you come from yet, right? We're nearly 10 minutes in, and we haven't even talked about how you're probably not related to Ragnar Lothbrok. And that is because this is how complex this issue is. This is how complicated genetics and DNA testing is. It's more complicated than you think. Ancestry DNA looks at all of the DNA samples that they have taken. These companies have databases of DNA samples, right? And they look at where people are, and they match your DNA to that. And that's where we encounter our problem. Because they don't look at where people were from, or what culture they were from. What they do is they look at where people are, present day. And those samples that they have in that database are overwhelmingly white European populations. Many people in Europe want to look at their backgrounds, many people in North America want to look into their backgrounds. It's relatively rare, it's comparatively rare, that there are big samples from, for example, Southeast Asia, which is why Until very recently, some of these companies would only say 20% Southeast Asia instead of saying Vietnam, Laos, Myanmar. Yeah? It's why a lot of these companies would say 20% Sub-Saharan Africa instead of saying 20% Congo, 20% Zimbabwe, because those sample sizes weren't there. And that is another area where mistakes will come in. They will, because that's an inaccuracy. If you don't have the data, you can't make an educated conclusion on it. So, the DNA samples tell you where people are now. It compares your DNA with present populations of people who have sent that DNA in. And this DNA database is only as old as these programs have been going. They've only been taking DNA samples for, let's be really generous and call it 45 years, right? We don't have a DNA map of medieval Europe. We just don't. We have DNA samples from some remains, but not all of those are viable. You can't always take a DNA sample. It's complex, it's expensive, it's an ethical minefield, depending on where and who you are. So we don't have that. Your ancestor, who is in, let's say you have an ancestor in Glasgow, right? And your ancestor in Glasgow may have been a Scot. They may have been 1,000 years ago. They may have been Pictish. Yeah? They may have been Brythonic, like me. They may have spoken Old or Middle Welsh 1,000 years ago in Strathclyde, in Ystrad. They may have been Scandinavian, living in Ystrad. They may have been Irish. They may have spoken Old Irish in Ystrad, or they may have been a Jute, an Angle, a Saxon, a Northumbrian. They could have been Manx, but we don't know. And we will never know. What your DNA testing will not tell you is whether your great-great-great-great-great-great-great-granddad who lived in Glasgow participated in Lowland Scottish culture, Highland Scottish culture, Manx, Irish, Welsh. Could have been anything. One of the other things we have to remember is you can inherit 0 DNA from an ancestor. You could inherit 1% DNA from an ancestor. And you could have 0 genes in common with your great-great-great-grandfather. 0. You could have no genes in common with them. You could look absolutely nothing like them. Again, because this is an immensely complicated issue that I don't even fully understand, and you should seek a doctor of genetics to explain this more. But Ancestry DNA testing relies, and this is one of the really big pitfalls, on self-assessment lineages. So this involves people like us today who have done a bit of genealogy, tracing their family back, probably making mistakes along the way, getting back 20 generations and saying, I am related directly to Ragnar Lothbrok. Let's just go for it. Or let's say, I'm directly descended from Owain Glyndŵr, right? The famous 15th century Welsh freedom fighter. I am directly a descendant from Owain Glyndŵr, and I have traced my family tree back to Owain Glyndŵr, and I have done my DNA test, and it says that I am 60% Welsh, and I am 20% Irish, and I am 10% Scottish, and I'm 5% English, and I'm 5% Danish. You're probably not. You've probably made some mistakes along the way in your research. The chances are that in the period that you're looking into, nobility have fairly solid birth and deaths of their children listed. The common people, 99% of the population, probably don't. They probably don't. There's a reason archaeologists give their own names to skeletons a lot of the time, and it's because ancient peoples and even medieval peoples regularly simply died. No gravestone, no inscription on the coffin, no inscription on the bones, not written down anywhere, or if it was written down, the text has not survived. The vast majority, and I mean the vast majority of people who have died on this planet, are forgotten. We do not know their names, and that is a sobering thing to think. but the majority of your ancestors and my ancestors are exactly the same. Before the 18th century and 17th century, maybe if you're lucky. Really difficult. Really, really difficult. And we don't have DNA for those people. They did not spit in a test tube and send it off to a database. They didn't. So how can we match our DNA with them? Well, you can't, can you? All you can do is match your DNA with the people who are in that part of the world now. And that is why our friend who said that he is DNA 60% Welsh, okay, well, so 60% of your sample is matched with current Welsh people. That doesn't mean anything. It does not work. It truly does not work. It is very good for things like close family relations. So it's really good for things like if you have a long-lost brother or sister or mother and father and you want to find out who they are or where they are. It can be really, really good for that if we have that DNA in the database, if that's available. And it can help to narrow that down as well. You can narrow things down really well for close relatives. But as soon as we're further away from close relatives, as I understand it, it is extremely fallible, especially when it's based off self-assessment lineages. So many people now go on Ancestry websites and use census data to trace their families back. And having done it professionally as a commissioned job, it is tougher than many people think. And it's real easy to make some mistakes here and there. So whenever I get people in the comments who say things like, hey, I am a direct descendant of the third king of Denmark, I'm like, you're not. You are statistically not. Like, we all have shared ancestors and we all have common ancestors, but in the way you think, in that direct descent way, statistically, you're not. And you share basically no DNA with them and also all of your DNA with them. It's why you see stuff like, well, I'm from Iowa and I'm from a Polish family and I'm 1% Chinese. Right, because you may share some genetic markers in common with somebody from China because there are billions of us, and that's just how statistical probabilities work, as far as I'm led to understand it. I failed maths. So I'm trying to explain a subject that is so difficult and nuanced and complex that I cannot fit it all on the back of a blood donations envelope, right? I am trying to tell people to do a bit more research here, because some of these companies may be using your DNA for nefarious purposes, they may be trying to scam you, and there are things with the genetic testing for diseases that they don't necessarily tell you, like lifestyle choices can make a difference in whether you get Alzheimer's or not. Yes, you can pass things on to your children, but you can also prevent them happening to yourself. Sometimes. Yes, you share DNA with people in Scotland or England, but it's pretty much impossible genetically and from DNA to tell if somebody is English or Irish. From the DNA testing, it is almost impossible. I've asked a couple of geneticists this as part of researching this video, and I was saying, can you tell if somebody is Irish or English from their DNA? And they were like, no, what? We're just a generic northwestern Europe. Like this tiny little island group in the sea in northwestern Europe. It's not all it's cracked up to be. Yet, we may reach a point where it becomes really incredibly good, but it's not a time machine. It's not a time machine and it's not a crystal ball. We don't have a DNA database from 1,000 years ago. So if you say that the DNA testing says that you're descended from a medieval king of Denmark, I'm sorry, but you're not. And no, it doesn't. It really, really doesn't, because it cannot, because we don't have their DNA. We don't have 1,000 years of DNA to prove that. Sorry. But yeah, I went off on a bit of a rabbit hole there, didn't I? So I hope that that was a bit of educational content for you. Thank you to June's Journey, by the way, for sponsoring the video. If you want to download June's Journey, there's a link in the description and a pinned comment. But yeah, wow, it's a lot, isn't it, this genetics, this DNA stuff. Anyway, I hope you found this interesting. I want this to be a springboard for you. Please do go off and do some reading. There's a little bit of reading in the description. Feel free to post any interesting links to academic articles that you want to share, and I hope that you enjoyed this. If you want to support the channel financially, then we have the Patreon link, we have the Coffee link. Thank you to all of my lovely new subscribers who've just joined the channel. Diolch yn fawr iawn I chi gyd. And yeah, tan y tro nesa, till the next time, hwyl am y tro. Bye bye for now.